As one of my favorite authors, Brene Brown, once wrote, authenticity is the daily practice of letting go of who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are. Which is why today I'm sharing 9 types of fantasy self items that you should declutter immediately for a home and life that don't just look good, but actually feel good as well. Hi there, friend, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Marissa, and this is A to Zen Life, where we talk about the A to Z of simplifying your way to a home and a life you love. So be sure and hit the subscribe button and turn on all notifications if that sounds like your jam. And if you've ever looked around your home and thought, why do I have all this stuff that I don't even use or like? Then this video is going to hit hard. Because all that clutter might not be as random as you think it is, and a lot of it is probably tied to some version of who you once thought or still think you should be. Which is exactly what fantasy self-clutter is, because fantasy self items are the things we buy and keep for an aspirational or idealized version of ourselves, rather than the body, lifestyle, or habits that exist in our reality. And this clutter category manifests as clutter for goals, hobbies, or identities that are rarely or never used, often resulting in wasted space, wasted money, and negative emotions like guilt or regret, which not only clutters up your home, your finances, and your mind, but worst of all, it keeps you stuck trying to become someone else instead of supporting who you actually are. It's like trying to wear someone else's skin, and we've all seen Silence of the Lambs, right? We all know how that turns out.
It rubs the lotion on its skin or else it gets the hose again.
So, what I want to do now is take you through my home and have you declutter with me as we talk about the different kinds of fantasy self clutter, starting with number 1 on this list, which is impractical or uncomfortable shoes. As a decluttering coach, I found that shoes are one of the most common fantasy self clutter culprits for women in particular, and they show up everywhere in pop culture, from the ruby slippers that Dorothy wore in The Wizard of Oz to Carrie Bradshaw's $40,000 designer shoe collection to Cinderella's glass slipper story that's over 300 years old. And when it comes to fantasy self shoes, the message is always the same, that beauty is worth the pain, whether that's actual physical pain of wearing high heels that give you blisters or broken ankles, or the existential pain we feel when we buy shoes made from impractical materials like suede, or ones that are so expensive that we don't even dare wear them outside. But ask yourself this: if these shoes hurt me, make me bleed, or I avoid wearing them, then what's the point in even owning them? So for my example of this clutter category, I have 2 pairs of shoes to get rid of. The first pair are these sandals, which have gotten completely worn out and flat to the point where they gave me a nasty case of plantar fasciitis from wearing them on long walks during one of our previous vacations. And then the other pair is this pair of flats that I hated wearing outside because they would get so dirty so fast and they were a pain to clean. And then I even tried repurposing them for indoor use with my walking pad that I have set up at my desk, only to realize when I actually started wearing them for long periods of time that they're horribly uncomfortable. So there's absolutely no reason for me to keep these. And one of the reasons it's taken me so long to declutter these shoes is because as a minimalist, I'm super picky when it comes to shoes. And not only do I want shoes that look good, but I also want them to be comfortable and easy to take care of. So it's taken me forever to find the right pair of shoes, which is why I'm so excited to be partnering with Vivaya to bring you today's video. Because if you're like me and you've been stuck in that cycle of buying cute but uncomfortable or nice but high maintenance shoes, then these are the complete opposite of that. I've actually had my eye on Vivaya for a while now because I was researching sustainable brands and I read about how they use recycled plastic bottles from the ocean to create their shoe uppers, which is such a cool and innovative technology. But honestly, as someone who has high arches and sensitive feet, what really made me fall in love with Vivaya's shoes is how lightweight and comfortable they are, so that even on the days I'm walking a lot trying to get in my 10,000 steps, I don't have to worry about my ankles getting rubbed raw or my feet getting tired and stinky because of the insanely breathable mesh texture, the soft padding that protects my heels from rubbing, and the cushioned insoles that make it feel like I'm walking on clouds. The shoes that I chose are the Kara 2.0 Walker sandals and the unisex all-day mesh slip-on sneakers, which are not only gorgeous, but also low maintenance. And I specifically got the all-day sneakers because they are machine washable, so I'm not afraid to wear them outside. Because I know that if they get dirty, all I have to do is toss them in the washer and they'll come out looking good as new in no time flat. I've linked the exact shoes I'm wearing down in the description box below, and right now you can get 12% off with my special discount code ATZ, but heads up, the code is only active for the next 3 days and then it switches to 10% off, and the new styles do tend to sell out fast, so be sure and grab a pair while you can. Now on to the next type of fantasy self-clutter on this list, which are clothes that don't fit your body or lifestyle. Oh my goodness, y'all. I was looking at myself in the camera, getting ready to record, and I was like, what is that blood looking spot on my shirt? And I realized that I somehow gashed open my finger and bled on my white shirt. So just absolutely perfect timing. I guess I have to change my shirt now. While I'm getting changed and applying some life-saving first aid to my poor little finger, let's talk about fantasy self clothes, because how many times do we buy clothes because they look good on our favorite influencer or on a mannequin at the store, only to get them home and realize this just isn't for me? I was actually joking about this the other day with my husband while we were pulling weeds in the garden, because while I fantasize about being like the women you see in the popular homesteading and simple living videos who do chores and gardening while wearing the most gorgeous linen dresses, the clothes I actually like wearing in the garden are a whole lot less cottagecore and a whole lot more Sid from Ice Age.
Oh, look at that. A dandelion. Must be the last one of the season.
Just kidding. Sid from Ice Age doesn't even wear clothes, but I think that you get what I'm trying to say. And the same rule also applies to things like blouses and PJs made from silk that you never dare to wear because you're afraid of ruining them, or the blazers that you used to wear all the time at work but haven't touched in the decades since you became a stay-at-home mom. And of course, let's not forget about those old jeans that you have from college that you have been hoping to fit into again, or the brand new pair you bought in a smaller size, hoping it would motivate you to finally lose weight. But keeping too many clothes that don't fit our current body or the lifestyle we actually live just takes up space in our closets, makes us feel guilty or behind every time we look at them, and makes it harder to get dressed in the morning. And at that point, it's a good idea to ask yourself questions like, is this something that I would purchase again if I saw it in the store brand new? Is this something that I've worn in the past 6 months to 1 year, depending on if it's seasonal or holiday or whatnot? And am I keeping this thing because I actually use and love it, or is it just because I'm afraid to let it go? And if you struggle with decluttering fantasy self-clothing items, I will be sure to link to my 10-page decluttering checklist with 15 questions that you can ask yourself to help you decide if you want to keep or let go of those items. Fantasy self-clutter category number 3 is unused exercise equipment. We're talking things like kettlebell sets, treadmills, fancy yoga mats, or right now the trend seems to be those rebounding trampolines. But the problem with these items is that they often feel productive and healthy and like you're doing something good for yourself. But what a lot of people realize is that buying the equipment is not the same thing as actually building the habit. And a lot of this stuff often goes unused in their homes. I mean, how many times have we seen either in our own house or someone else's house a giant treadmill or an expensive Peloton machine that's been turned into a glorified clothing rack?
I understood the assignment. Did the assigner of the assignment understood who they were assigning the assignment to?
And a lot of people have a hard time letting go of this type of clutter because not only was it typically a little bit on the expensive side and they feel like they're wasting money, but then it also tends to be large and heavy and kind of a pain to get rid of, honestly. Unfortunately, what you need to realize is that the money is wasted when you buy the thing, not when you get rid of it. So if you bought workout equipment or gear and either never used it or tried it and realized it wasn't for you, there's no guilt or shame in getting rid of those things and freeing yourself up for more space and time and money and energy for the kinds of workouts that you actually do enjoy. And if you're thinking of making a purchase like this again in the future, I would encourage you to try to think outside of the box and think of ways that you can try to implement that habit into your existing routine and lifestyle without spending any money. So, for example, when I was thinking about buying my walking pad, I made sure that I actually made walking a habit first before I actually pulled the trigger on buying that item. And then when I was recently reading this book called Walk with Weight, and he's talking about rucking, instead of heading to Amazon and buying an expensive rucking vest or a backpack or something like that, what I decided to do was take my son's old kindergarten backpack and just put a few heavy books in it and use that instead. That way I can see if I actually like rucking or walking with weight first before I spend any money buying something new to bring into my home. And I think this is such an important mindset shift because your fantasy self will buy the equipment first and hope that the habit will follow. But your real self would probably do better to test the habit first, save money, and earn the upgrade before you go through with that purchase. And I call this proof of concept theory, which I actually mentioned in several videos. And I will link one of those up here for you as well as down in the description box below in case you're interested in hearing more about that. Next up, let's talk about kitchen clutter because I know a lot of us have a fantasy self who loves to hang out in the kitchen. I bet there's not a single person watching this video who hasn't fallen for one of those trendy gadgets or appliances that promise to make your life easier, faster, healthier, or more aesthetic. But then the reality is they just end up sitting in your cabinets, taking up space and collecting dust. I know a ton of people who got sucked into what I like to call the sourdough wormhole and bought a bunch of stuff to make sourdough only to realize they didn't have time for it or enjoy actually using that stuff. So it just ended up sitting around in their kitchen cabinets for years. And I've also fallen for this trap myself. I bought a thrifted bundt cake pan that when I actually got around to using it after many, many years, found that it was such a pain to clean that I couldn't even stand it. And I also purchased one of those aesthetic glass coffee makers that you see in all of the minimalist and simple living videos, only to realize it actually doesn't keep your coffee that hot, and my husband and I didn't like using it that much. So instead, what we use now is this simple on the cup coffee maker, and this we pretty much only use when we want to put flowers on the table. And speaking of putting flowers on the table, that leads me to the next fantasy self-clutter item, which is dysfunctional home decor or wall art. This one might be a little controversial, but not all decor is worth keeping, especially when it makes your life harder. And I'm talking about things like having too many throw pillows on the couch that your kids are always tossing around and you're constantly having to clean up, or that chair that looked absolutely gorgeous in a magazine but causes you physical pain and discomfort every time you sit in it. So my example of this is this green vase that you see behind me, and I got this from Target on clearance. It's from the Hearth and Hand collection, and I got it because I absolutely loved the olive green color of the glass. I'm not sure you can see it here really well. I might have to take it somewhere else and put it in the light. I actually got both these two vases at the exact same time from the exact same place, but one of them I've used many times and the other I haven't used once. Because what I found, oh my gosh, it's getting so dark. What I found was that when I had tall flowers that I wanted to put into a vase, I was always reaching for this one instead of this one because this one felt a lot more stable. It's a lot heavier and the bottom is flat, whereas this one is a little bit asymmetrical and the smaller bottom makes it feel a little bit less steady and a little bit more dangerous in terms of the fact that it might tip over. And since my kids sit at the table to do their homework, and sometimes they're horsing around and they jostle the table, I never ever really felt safe having this on the table with flowers in it. And so I always reach for this one instead. But then I've been having such a hard time letting go of this one because I really do love this olive green color. It's just so rich and gorgeous, and it looks absolutely fantastic with the warm wood and the color schemes that we have in our home. But then last time when I went to IKEA, I found this small vase that is in exactly the same color. So I ended up bringing this one home, and now that I've found a beautiful green vase that I can actually use, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this. Remember, decor that looks good in photos but doesn't function in real life isn't practical, because your home is not a showroom. It's a place for you to live. And if something is constantly annoying you, getting in the way, or creating extra work, even if it's pretty, it's not worth keeping. The sixth type of fantasy self-clutter on this list is unfinished DIY and mending projects. And I think this is a really easy clutter category to accumulate if you're someone who is creative, or someone who is frugal, or you're someone who cares about sustainability, or you have a fantasy self who is any of those things. So for this example, what I'd like to share with you is the difference between this pink bathrobe that I thrifted last year from Goodwill and this pair of felt slippers. Now, both of these items are either a DIY or a mending project, or in some cases both, but only one of them I'm interested in actually doing and the other I want to get rid of. And we'll talk about which one is which in just a moment, but to give a little context here, I'd like to introduce you to what I like to call the timed rule for repurposing or upcycling projects. Timed stands for time, instruments, money, expertise, and desire. And let's go through each of these one by one in the actual order that I like to use them. So the first question is, do I have the time for this project? So when it comes to repurposing and upcycling projects, a lot of us overestimate how much free time we have to tackle these kinds of things. And of course, I know we would love to be frugal and sustainable and be able to reuse these things and save money to the best of our advantage, but we don't always have sufficient free time to be able to do all of those things. Two other important considerations are, do I have the expertise and the instruments required to tackle this project? So for this robe, what I wanted to do was I wanted to dye it to a color that was more suitable to my complexion and that fit with the rest of my wardrobe better. So I did have to get some dye for those clothes, but I'm actually planning on doing some more dyeing projects. So that's something that I already knew that I needed. And somebody made the lovely suggestion that to practice the color, what I could do is I could remove the little loopies that were the belt of this, because this was actually a bathrobe, and take those off and dye them first to practice. And to do that, I already had the sewing equipment required to tackle that part of it. So I pretty much had everything that I needed already on hand. Versus this pair of shoes, as you can see, they have gotten really worn out here in the back. The bottoms are almost falling apart and have nearly worn through right here. And you probably didn't notice this when I was wearing it, but it's actually gotten a hole here in the toe because I have raptor toes that like to pop up when I'm walking. So technically I could try to mend these slippers by felting, but I've never felted anything in my life. I don't have the materials that I would need to do so, such as felt. I don't have the correct needles. And because I don't have the expertise or the instruments, it really doesn't make sense for me to try to do that. So then if you don't have the instruments and the expertise, the next question you have to ask yourself is, am I willing to pay money for someone else to fix this for me? Such as if you have a pair of pants that's too large, you could go to a tailor to have them fix it. Or if you have a pair of shoes that the soles have worn out, you could go to the cobbler to have them put on new soles for your shoes. And then the final question in the timed rule is, do I have the internal desire and drive to do this? And this kind of circles back to the original question of, do I have the time? Because we all have a finite amount of time in our day. So we have to choose what we want to fill that time with. And if there is a project that we're interested in tackling and that we're actually excited about and looking forward to, then you can absolutely keep that thing. But if it's something like this pair of slippers that I don't know what to do with them, I don't have the stuff to deal with them, and I don't want the headache of dealing with it, then that's not something that I need to worry about. And that would be a kind of fantasy self-clutter that I would choose to get rid of. But like I said, whenever you're going through your unfinished DIY and mending projects, you can use this timed rule to ask yourself these questions to decide whether or not those projects are actually worth your time or you should let go of them. The next category is unwanted or unfinished books and movies. And this one is sneaky because we tend to hold on to these things for all the right reasons. Books that we bought or movies that we purchased with the best of intentions, but either never started or were never able to finish. But we feel like we should keep them either because they're classics or because they're so popular and everyone else loves them. So why don't we? My example is this book that I recently got from the little free library in our neighborhood, and I love Jane Austen. I've read several of her other books, and I really enjoyed them. And I thought that this one looked so cute, and I was really interested in checking it out, especially because it's a classic, and I've made the goal of reading more this year. But since I got this from the little free library, it's just been sitting on the sideboard now for over a month, and I've never gotten around to actually reading it. And it's definitely not a case of me not having the time or the inclination to read, because in that same time frame, I've reread this book a second time, Discipline is Destiny. I read this book called Walk with Weight. I finished the third book in the Wilderlore series that my kids have really been enjoying and wanted me to read as well. And I went a little bit outside my comfort zone and read this book about the Black Dahlia murder case way back in mid-century Hollywood, and it was really interesting. But for whatever reason in that same time frame, I've skipped over this book several times and just never gotten around to picking it up. So I'm going to go ahead and let this go and return it to the little free library from whence it came. And I encourage you to go through your collection of books and movies and see if there's anything you want to declutter in that category as well. And you don't have to feel guilty about letting go of these things because, like I mentioned before, your time and attention are limited, and your home and your hobbies should reflect the things you actually enjoy, not things that feel like an obligation or a burden for you to own. Consider this a gentle reminder that it's okay to let those things go. Okay, now that that's taken care of, we're going to head down to my lower level and go through the next category, which is unwanted cleaning tools and supplies. Because almost all of us have been influenced at some point to buy cleaning tools and gadgets because they're trendy or aesthetic, or because they promise that they're going to simplify everything. I know tons of people who have spent hundreds of dollars on robot vacuums or the latest Dyson product, only to get those things home and realize they didn't live up to the hype and their expectations. For me, I recently had tried to get some products that have been touted as the eco-friendly, sustainable solution. I've seen so many influencers talking about these products and how great they are, so I was super excited to try them. But when I got them, I realized that they just didn't really work for our laundry and our dishwasher. They left behind this kind of chalky white residue, and they didn't really leave our clothes smelling clean. And I have a hard time even blaming the brand for this because our washer and dryer and our dishwasher are like 25 years old. So maybe it's just that these products aren't compatible with the appliances and the technology that we have. But then I'm not going to go out and buy a new dishwasher or a new washing machine just to accommodate some eco-friendly, sustainable products. Sometimes you love the idea of a thing only to find out in practice it doesn't really work for you. And that's okay because you're allowed to try things and decide that they're not for you. And you don't have to hold on to cleaning supplies, tools, or gadgets that didn't work for you and your home. And finally, the last fantasy self-clutter category on this list is beauty and hygiene products that you don't use or enjoy. I myself have fallen into this trap so many times in the past. Even as a minimalist, if you look back when I first started this channel, I used to think that I had to wear lipstick to look pretty and professional, but I quickly realized that I hated it. First of all, I felt like it emphasized how thin my lips are, which is something that I'm already self-conscious about. And second, I hated how it would wear off while I was talking, and I would have to be reapplying it constantly. And if I wasn't paying close attention, sometimes it would end up looking really bad in those videos. So I ended up decluttering all of my lipsticks, and nowadays all I do is I use Aquaphor on my lips, and I've also completely eliminated a lot of other beauty and hygiene categories. I don't wear nail polish anymore. I don't have any hair tools aside from owning a hair dryer. And the craziest part is the more I got rid of and the less I owned in those categories, the more I started feeling like myself. And that's the dirty little secret about these fantasy self-clutter items, because they're not just clutter, they're pressure, they're guilt, and they're expectations that weigh us down and stop us from leading our best and most authentic life. And if any of this resonated with you and you're ready to take your decluttering to the next level, be sure and go check out one of these videos that YouTube thinks that you'll like, or I'll see you next week. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.